Hello, and welcome back to Podgers on History. Today, I thought I'd take the opportunity of the good weather, surprisingly, for October, to pay a visit to Falmouth in Cornwall, near where I live, and talk about some of Falmouth's Second World War history that people might not know about. Uh, I thought I'd talk about the fact that Falmouth has a surprising amount of Second World War history. It was quite a substantial dockyard during the Second World War, and in the early days of the war, when France was falling, a lot of French refugees escaped from Brittany in their fishing boats and would actually end up in Falmouth because they knew to come here. Same with Penzance, just down the coast, and Newlyn. They were big fishing hubs, and the French knew to flee there because they were friendly with the Cornish. But Falmouth has a surprising amount of links to SOE and the clandestine side of warfare, which not many people know about. Falmouth's fairly well known as one of the places that a lot of the American forces left for D-Day, but I want to focus more on the kind of unknown, small-scale side of it. As I say, many people fled here during the beginning of the war, including Charles de Gaulle's family. He asked us to try and get his family out after he'd fled himself, leaving them behind conveniently and asking us to go and get them through. But they actually made their own way here, and we sent a mission to France to go and grab them. By the time we got there, they were already in Falmouth, which was a good example of how the French and the British, for a fair bit of the war, didn't really like communicating with each other about what each was doing. A few famous names from SOE actually managed to escape from France and ended up landing in this part of the world. Maurice Southgate, who ran the stationer circuit in France, he, at the beginning of the war, had to try and escape from Brittany, and he managed to end up in Falmouth. He made it in a small fishing vessel. He barely made it. They were all low on water, low on food. When he got to Falmouth, he got a typical Cornish welcome. They gave him a bath, they gave him food, and while he was in the bath, they stole his watch, which he never forgave them for. Norinyak Khan, very famous radio operator for SOE, the Indian princess of SOE. She escaped from France and ended up in Falmouth before heading to London. We trained as a wireless operator, first for the Women's Auxiliary Air Force and then for SOE. It's one of those places that just seems to have a lot of small, surprising links. The first agents to ever go back to France set off from here. There's a man called Hubert Moreau was the first to go back. He took a fishing boat and figured he could disguise himself as a fisherman with a crew and go back to France and see what the situation was now it was occupied. This was very early on in the war, still 1940. He got him and his crew over there, but he did manage at the same time to beach his boat for an entire day in full view of the Germans. The Germans themselves didn't particularly mind, but he was almost arrested by the French police in suspicion of being a spy. Luckily, he knew a local official who was able to get him the transit papers to get out, which also provided good intelligence for us back in this country trying to get agents in the country. And once he'd managed to escape from that situation, he sailed all the way back to here, which is Pendennis Point at the peninsula of Falmouth. He sailed all the way back here, and he was signalled by Pendennis Castle, which is an anti-aircraft battery. And he didn't know the response code, so he just carried on sailing towards them. So we decided to fire a shot across his bow, where he then decided it might be better to just sit where he was and wait to be arrested. Around the corner from here, not too far down the coast, is the Helford River near Helston. And that's quite interesting because at the beginning of the war, we weren't doing very well. So there were a lot of private armies and especially private navies were springing up quite often. MI6, Secret Intelligence Service, they had set up secret navies and private navies. They'd set up private navies in Dartmouth and were trying to set one up down here for missions across into Brittany. And quite a lot of other people thought that's quite a good idea, actually. We might steal that idea. And one of the people who did that originally was a man called Jerry Holdsworth, who decided he wanted to set one up for SOE. And he came down here and he found the Helford River to be the perfect place. So he set up the Inshore Patrol Flotilla, which is now known as the Helford Flotilla, which is a small, fairly successful private navy. But they did butt heads with the SIS flotillas from Dartmouth, ran by Captain Slocum. he wasn't very happy because SOE were the new kids on the block. They didn't really get on with everyone else because they were new and they were doing things that no one else had done before. And SOE were planning to go across to commit acts of sabotage, whereas SIS were trying to get information and drop spies off. And you can't have explosions going off when you're trying to be stealthy. So Captain Slocum actually started himself getting interested in the Helpful Flotilla by looking at shutting it down. There were many arguments and jurisdictional debates. Gubbins, the head of SOE, had to come down quite a few times to settle disputes between them. And in 1942, operations were scaled right down for SOE. They were basically told to stop doing everything they're doing. The most they did were a few supply runs across to Brittany where they were supplies on beaches. But quite quickly they were told to stop what they were doing, sadly. It didn't stop them training in the local area, though. Pendennis Point had an actual full-scale battle fought on it between the Home Guard and the SOE as a training exercise. The SOE suffered 2 casualties, one of which came back to life during the middle of the battle because he'd actually been accidentally killed by his own side, and they realised that didn't really count. The Helford Flotilla was also ran by a family called Warrington Smythe. There was 3 of them. There was 2 brothers and their father, and they were essentially mad geniuses. They'd just kind of experiment with whatever they could, figure out whatever they could. The brothers ended up going to the Mediterranean once the Helford was scaled down to run missions to Greece and Italy. But before they did that, they had the genius idea of agents being dropped off by boat didn't have a way of defending themselves, so they wanted to come up with something that they could use on the way to shore. And one of them came up with the idea of mounting a Bren gun on top of a surfboard, which, if any of you have ever seen a Bren gun, it's not a light thing. It's a very heavy machine gun and very awkward to hold and use even on the ground, let alone at sea. But they wanted to test it. So in the middle of the night, they sent a young recruit called Pip Jarvis, was sent out on his surfboard and his Bren gun. And he swam round to Pendennis Point, nearly killing himself in the process. He kept nearly capsizing the Bren gun, just throwing the weight of the surfboard off. And he realised that it was completely a waste of time. There was no point even thinking of adopting it. But his curiosity got the better of him, and he thought, I wonder if I can even fire this thing while I'm on this. So he let off a couple of rounds, short round bursts, and Pendennis Point lit up. And they started firing at the sky, thinking that they were being raided. And he had to very quickly and quietly swim away and try not to drown in the process. Another interesting link with Falmouth is the auxiliaries. The auxiliaries were a unit set up almost alongside SOE. Gubbins, the leader of SOE, he had a hand in creating them. He had the idea of stay-behinds. So if we were ever to be invaded, these stay-behinds and auxiliaries would go into hiding. They had secret underground bunkers that were fully stocked with food, supplies, ammunition, explosives. And they would wait out for the Germans to get ahead and set up a line. And then they would appear and either go around killing important officials that knew information that might be useful to the Germans, or simply just destroying infrastructure that might be useful to the Germans. And in Cornwall, there were plenty of these operating bases that were set up for auxiliaries. And one of their targets was the viaduct at Tor Point, along with the fuel reserves there. And there was actually a fuel station at the top of Pendennis Point. I'll insert some footage of it in a moment. There was a fuel station there that was a target. It was set up. But the person in charge of the auxiliaries down in the southwest for Devon and Cornwall, a man called Edmondson, he didn't think it was a very good target because he felt that if they destroyed the fuel reserves, the fuel would flow down the hill into the town and destroy more of the town than the Germans ever could. So it was kind of a target that was never really a serious target. And nearby Falmouth, there are actually still a few of these operating bases, these hidden bunkers, that are still accessible. They're not on public land at the moment, and some of them are still fairly unsafe, but they are logged with CART, the Coleshill Auxiliary Research Team. They have the rough location and who ran them, these sorts of things. It's something that we need to research more, actually, because every time the auxiliaries in Cornwall is mentioned, we hear the name miners, and there seems to be multiple people with the last name of miners who were running these operating bases. We wonder if they were all related, if they knew each other, because auxiliaries weren't even supposed to know about the other teams in their local area. It was supposed to be that top secret. Someone that we work with, Bruce at work, he used to work with someone called Miners, and he wonders if there's any relation Bruce also at work, and he also met one of the Warrington Smides in the 80s, I believe it was. He did some work on his land because he'd moved back to Cornwall after the war, back to the Helford. He actually lived on the banks of the river where the flotilla used to be. And someone I work with did some work for him and got a pasty and a beer. And I was told that this man had done secret missions during the war and sailed boats in the Med. And at the time, you don't think anything of it, especially when you're working and you've just been given a pasty. That's kind of where your focus is. But we kind of wish we'd been able to ask him some questions about his time during the war. Well, thank you for joining me on that little video. Hoping to do a few more of these, maybe talk about some other little bits of local history that aren't really known. I want to talk more about the health flotilla, especially at some point. Have a fair bit of research into that. I actually have a copy of the logbook of their day-to-day activities that I've been reading. I need to reread. So hopefully there'll be a more in-depth video on that at some point. Thank you for watching, and hopefully see you in the next video.